妙蓮華南無妙蓮華南無妙蓮華。All right. Good morning, everyone. I've got my coffee. Let us start on the Go Show. Conversation between a sage and an unenlightened man. Now, as you know, many of Nichiren's Go Show take they take different forms. Some of them are personal letters that we read, and there's always some scholarship as well as advice. So it's useful to read because it's amazing, actually, how, or maybe it's not so amazing, but to read 13th century letters that are so applicable to modern society and the travails of our lives. It's somewhat amazing. Then there are some that take the form of a very elaborate scholarship and documentation of Buddhist concepts that are usually written as more documents offered to leaders of the nation, the shogunate, or powerful players in the society of Japan in the 13th century. Those are more documents of, Buddhist scholarship. They're less personal. They're more about the proper and correct practice of Buddhism. And then there are these teaching documents. And oftentimes when Nichiren wrote these types of gosho, these types of writings, they took the form of question and answer. And because he didn't have in his day don't know what word, a partner, an equal, another interlocutor that was as capable as he would make the voice of both. He would ask questions not only that he thought were pertinent to the teaching he was offering, but also reflected the people of his day and the questions that they either would be somewhat afraid to ask or didn't know how to ask, so that he could address large groups of concerns along with this particular teaching that he was trying to put out. So all of that is to say that as we enter this Gosho, conversation between a sage and an unenlightened man, is that Nichiren plays both parts, and that this kind of teaching, this question-answer format, is very much a teaching, quote-unquote, proper. In other words, it is a document that we can see as a sort of a Nichiren Sutra of Buddhist scholarship. So important. All of them are important, but these perhaps take a little bit more time to digest. They tend to be more, they tend to be longer. They tend to be filled with a lot of references. So as we read them, we'll probably end up jumping from document to document and go do independent research. So it requires more time. Sorry about that. I just needed a little more light. So I noticed on the screen that was quite a rude awakening. So I apologize. Okay, so without further ado, Part 1. Having received life, one cannot escape death. Yet, though everyone, from the noblest, the emperor, on down to the lowliest commoner, recognizes this as a fact, not even one person in 1,000 or 10,000 truly takes the matter seriously or grieves over it. Suddenly confronted with evidence of the impermanence of life, we may be frightened at the thought that we have remained so distant from Buddhism and lament that we have been too engrossed in secular affairs. Yet we assume that those who have preceded us in death are wretched, and that they who remain alive are superior. Busy with the tasks, busy with that task yesterday and this affair today, we are helplessly bound by the 5 desires of our worldly nature, unaware that time passes as quickly as a white colt glimpsed through a crack in the wall, ignorant as sheep being led to the slaughter, held hopeless prisoners by our concern for food and clothing, we fall heedlessly into the snares of fame and profit, and in the end make our way back to that familiar village in the 3 evil paths, where we are reborn time after time in the realm of the 6 paths. What person of... Here we go again with my page-turning karma. Wow, it does not want to separate. Here we go. What person of feeling could fail to grieve at such a state of affairs, or could fail to be moved to sorrow? So, he's identifying there, if that wasn't clear enough for you, a teaching of Gurdjieff from Russia that I read many years ago, chose to say it this way, that most people simply fall through life or plummet through life waiting for things to happen to them, rather than being awake and conscious and understanding that we are the drivers of our lives. Most people simply just fall through them, responding wisely or unwisely to whatever conditions arise in their life. This is what Nichiren is talking about here, and in the light of Buddhism, which is a proactive mindset, this is a lamentable state that we have all of this power of being able to be the conductor of our lives, and yet choose instead to simply respond to things that it's like walking through a minefield, and we just, we blow up all the time, instead of knowing that we are cartographers, can make a map and choose to either walk around or navigate that life safely. So it's, from that perspective, quite lamentable, yes? So this is why he says, move to sorrow. Alas, neither young nor old know what fate awaits them. Such is the way of our Saha world. So this is the condition of samsara, right? All those who meet are destined to part again. Such is the rule in this floating world we live in. Although none of this had just struck me for the first time, I was appalled at seeing all those who took early leave of this world in the beginning of the Shoka era. Some of them left, and again, there are footnotes here for Shoka era. As I already explained, you're going to end up jumping around a lot, but I'm just going to read through this for the sake of continuity, okay? Some of them left little children behind them, while others were forced to abandon their aged parents. How sad their hearts must have been when, though still in the prime of their life, they were obliged to set off on their journey to the Yellow Springs. It was painful for those who departed, and painful for those left behind. The king of Chu'u's passion for the goddess remained as a wisp of morning cloud, another footnote, and Liu's grief at remembering his meeting with the immortal visitor was consoled by the sight of his descendants of the 7th generation. You've heard us talking about 7 generations back and forward. I'll leave that for you to research. But how can a person like myself win release from my sorrow? I find myself recalling the poet of old, who hoped that because he was a humble-hearted dweller in the mountains, he might be free of such sadness. Now, gathering together my thoughts, as the men of Naniwa gather seaweed to extract salt, I give them form with my writing brush as a memento for people in latter ages. How said, wow, I must need more coffee. How sad, how lamentable it is. From the beginningless past, we have been drunk on the wine of ignorance, reborn again and again in the 6 paths of existence and the 4 forms of birth. Sometimes we gasp amid the flames of the hell of burning heat, or the hell of great burning heat. Sometimes we are frozen in the ice of the hell of the crimson lotus, or the hell of the great crimson lotus. Sometimes we must endure the hunger and thirst that torment those in the realm of hungry spirits, for 500 lifetimes not so much as hearing the word food or drink. Sometimes we suffer being wounded and killed in the realm of animals, the wounding and killing that occurs when the small are swallowed up by the large, or the short engulfed by the long. Sometimes we face the contention and strife of the realm of Asuras, the world of anger. It's nice, he's giving definition to the 6 lower worlds here, so we have separate videos on the 10 worlds, but here you see some of that definition by Nichiren himself. Sometimes we are born as human beings, the world of humanity, or Nin, and undergo the 8 sufferings of birth, aging, sickness, death, the pain of parting from loved ones, the pain of encountering those whom we hate, the pain of failing to obtain what we desire, and the pain that arises from the 5 components of body and mind. And sometimes we are born in the realm of heaven and experience the 5 signs of decay. So heaven in Buddhism isn't the ultimate place, is it? Heaven is a place of the world of rapture, of this excitement, well, you can read about the world. So he's talking about there, because it also has its sufferings, right? And so we go round and round like a cartwheel in this threefold world. Even among people once related as father and child, parents reborn do not know that they were parents. Here we go. Or children that they were children. And though husband and wife re-encounter each other, they do not know that they have already met. We go astray as though we had the eyes of sheep. We are as ignorant as though we had the eyes of wolves. We do not know our past relationship with the mother who gave us birth, and we are unaware of when we ourselves will succumb to death. And yet, we have obtained birth in the human world, something difficult to achieve, and have encountered the sacred teachings of the Thus Come One, which are rarely to be met. We are like the one-eyed turtle, finding a floating log with a hole in it that fits him exactly. This is a fable that is referred to a lot, and I'll leave it to you to look it up. It's very interesting. It points to the incredible opportunity we have being born human. How regrettable it would be, then, if we did not take this opportunity to sever the bonds of birth and death, making no attempt to free ourselves from the cage of the threefold world. This refers to the mental cage we promulgate through our cravings of permanence. Then a wise man appeared and addressed the unenlightened man, saying, so here we go, we've had his overture, and now we're going to enter into the teaching that he's pointing to in that anecdote. You are quite right to lament as you do, but those who understand the impermanence of this world in this way and turn their hearts to goodness are rarer than the Qilin's horns, while those who fail to understand and instead give themselves to evil thoughts are more numerous than the hairs on a cow. If you wish to arouse the aspiration for enlightenment and to quickly free yourself from the sufferings of birth and death, then I know the finest doctrine that there is for such a purpose. If you wish, I will explain it to you so that you may know it, or know of it. The unenlightened man rose from his seat, pressed his palms together, and said, quote, "For some time now I have been studying the classics of secular literature and giving all my attention to matters of poetry, so I have no detailed knowledge of the Buddhist teachings. I hope that you will be kind enough to explain them to me, sir." At that time, the wise man said, quote, "You must listen with the ears of Ling Lun, borrow the eyes of Li Chu, and still your mind, and I will explain things to you. The sacred teachings of Buddhism number no less than 80,000, but the most important teaching, the father and mother of all the schools, is that concerning the precepts and rules of conduct. In India, the Bodhisattvas Vasubandhu and Ashvagosha, and in China, the priests Huquang and Dao Xuan, placed great emphasis on these. And in our own country, during the reign of the 45th sovereign, Emperor Shomu, the Reverend Chen Ganjin, brought to Japan the teachings of the Precept School, along with those of the Tendai School, and established an ordination platform for administering the precepts at Todaiji Temple. From that time down to the present, the precepts have been revered over many long years, and the honor paid to them increases daily. In particular, there is the Honorable Ryokan of Gokuraku-ji. Everyone from the Supreme Ruler on down to the common people looks up to him as a living thus come one, and on observing his conduct, we find that it is indeed in keeping with such a reputation. He directed charitable activities at the port of Lijima, collected rice at the Matsura barrier, and used the funds to build roads in the various provinces. He set up barriers along the 7 highways, collected a toll from everyone who passed by, and used the money to build bridges across a number of rivers. In such acts of compassion, he is equal to the thus come one, and his virtuous deeds surpass those of the sages of the past. If you wish to quickly free yourself from the sufferings of birth and death, then you should observe the 5 precepts and the 250 precepts, deepen your compassion for others, refrain from killing any living thing, and, like the Honorable Ryokan, engage in building roads and bridges. This is the finest of all teachings. Are you prepared to embrace it? The unenlightened man pressed his palms together more fervently than ever, and said, "Indeed, I want very much to embrace it. Please explain it to me thoroughly. You speak of the 5 precepts and the 250 precepts, but I do not know what they are. Please describe them to me in detail." Now don't fret, this is only the beginning. This might sound like a step backwards to those of you students who've gone out there and studied, but stick with it. The wise man said, quote, "Your ignorance is abysmal. Even a child knows what the 5 precepts and the 250 precepts are. However, I will explain them to you. The 5 precepts comprise, first, the prohibition against taking life. The second, the prohibition against stealing. Third, the prohibition against lying. Fourth, the prohibition against unlawful sexual intercourse. And the 5th, the prohibition against drinking intoxicants. The 250 precepts are numerous, and so I will not get into them here." So already we're starting to slough off some of this stuff, right? At this, the unenlightened man bowed low and with the deepest respect said, From this day forward I will devote myself to this doctrine with all my heart. This man had an old acquaintance, a lay Buddhist believer living in retirement, who paid him a visit to cheer him up. At first the visitor spoke about the affairs of the past, liking them to the dream that is endless and hazy, and then he talked of the future, pointing out how vast and dark it is, how difficult to predict. After he had sought in this way to divert his listener and to explain his own views, he said, quote, "Most of us who live in this world of ours find we cannot help thinking about the life to come. May I ask, what kind of Buddhist doctrine have you embraced in order to free yourself from the sufferings of birth and death, or to pray for the welfare of those who have gone on to another life?" The unenlightened man replied, quote, "The other day an eminent priest called on me and instructed me in the 5 precepts and the 250 precepts. In truth, I am deeply impressed with his teaching and find them most admirable. Although I know I can never equal the Honorable Ryokan, I have determined to do all I can to repair roads that are in poor condition and to build bridges over rivers that are too deep for wading through." Then the lay believer gave him words of advice, saying, quote, "Your concern for the way would seem to be admirable, but your approach is foolish. The doctrine you have just described to me is the lowly teaching of the Hinayana. That is why the Buddha has set forth 8 analogies, and why Bodhisattva Manjushri has described 17 differences between the Hinayana and the Mahayana. The Buddha has said, for example, that the Hinayana is like the light of a firefly compared to the brilliance of the sun, or like plain crystal compared to emerald. Moreover, the teachers of India, China, and Japan have written not a few treatises refuting the Hinayana teachings. Next, concerning your reverence for those who observe these practices, a teaching is not necessarily worthy of honor simply because its practitioners are respected. It is for this reason that the Buddha laid down the principle, quote, "Rely on the law and not on the persons." I have heard it said that the sages of ancient times who observed the precepts could not bear even to utter the words kill or hoard, but would substitute some pure-sounding circumlocution, and when they happened to catch sight of a beautiful woman, they would meditate upon the image of a corpse. But if we examine their behavior of the priests of today, who supposedly observe the precepts, we find that they hoard silks, wealth, and jewels, and concern themselves with lending money and interest. Since their doctrines and their practices differ so greatly, who would think of putting any resolute mind or conviction in them? And as for this matter of building roads and constructing bridges, it only causes people trouble. The charitable activities at the port of Lijima and the collecting of rice at the Matsura barrier have brought unhappiness to a great many people, and the setting up of barriers along the 7 highways of the various provinces has imposed a hardship upon travelers. These are things that are happening right in front of our eyes. Can't you see what is going on? I thought I learned something, right? The unenlightened man, therefore, flushed with anger, and said, "You with your little bit of wisdom have no cause to speak ill of that eminent priest and to defame his teachings. Do you do so knowingly, or are you simply a fool? It is a fearful thing you are doing." Then the lay believer laughed and said, quote, "Alas, you are the foolish one. Let me briefly explain to you the biased views of that school. You should understand that when it comes to the Buddhist teaching, there is the Mahayana division and the Hinayana division, and that in terms of schools, there are those based upon the provisional teachings and those based upon the true teachings. Long ago, when the Buddha taught the Hinayana doctrines in Deer Park, he was opening the gate to a phantom city. But later, when the mats were spread for the teaching of the Lotus Sutra on Eagle Peak, then those earlier doctrines ceased to be of any benefit. End quote. And I'll go a little further before we go on to the second part. The unenlightened man looked at the lay believer in perplexity and said, both the documentary evidence and the evidence of actual fact indeed support what you have said, but then what kind of Buddhist teachings ought one embrace in order to free oneself from the sufferings of birth and death and quickly attain Buddhahood? The other replied, quote, although I am only a layman, I have given myself earnestly to the practice of Buddhism, and from the time of my youth I have listened to the words of many teachers, and have done a certain amount of reading in the sacred teachings. For those of us of this latter age, who have committed all manner of evil, there is nothing that can compare with the Nembutsu teachings that lead to the rebirth in the Pure Land. Thus, the supervisor of priests, Eshin, says, the teachings and practices that lead to rebirth in the land of perfect bliss are the eyes and the feet for those who have lived in this defiled latter age of ours. End quote. The Honorable Honen collected key passages from the various sutras and spread the doctrine of exclusive devotion, to the practice of the Nembutsu. In particular, the original vows of the Buddha Amida surpass the vows of all other Buddhas in their worth and importance. From the first vow that there are 3 evil paths and will not exist in this land, down to the last vow that bodhisattvas will be enabled to attain the 3 types of perception, all of Amida's compassionate vows are to be greatly welcomed. But the 18th vow is particularly effective on our behalf. In addition, even those who have committed the 10 evil acts or the 5 cardinal sins are not excluded. Nor is any distinction made between those who have recited the Nembutsu only one time and those who have recited it many times. For this reason, everyone from the ruler on down to the common people favors this school far above the other schools, and how many countless people have gained rebirth in the Pure Land as a result of it. Now, I know, we've already talked about Nembutsu, but stay with it. The unenlightened man said, truly one should be ashamed of the small and yearn for the great, abandon the shallow and embrace the profound. This is not only a principle of Buddhism, but a rule of the secular world as well. Therefore, I would like to shift my allegiance, without delay, to this school you have described. Please explain its principle to me in greater detail. You say that even those who have committed the 5 cardinal sins or the 10 evil acts are not excluded from the Buddha's compassionate vows. What, may I ask, are the 5 cardinal sins and the 10 evil acts? And on that note, we're going to have to postpone this to a second video, which I may do right after this. But for now, there's a little bit to chew on. I think if you've been following along, you see where this is headed. But I think it's a very useful lesson, isn't it? In how we're attracted to certain things as we learn them. And they seem to be the pinnacle of learning until, once again, we keep on studying. And this is the point. You have to study broadly. And then, suddenly, a new epiphany, right? So we're getting there. For now, thank you so much for participating. And I'll see you next time. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo.